I'm going to create a custom instruction in ChatGPT that will write some code so that I can take the video that you're listening to right now, store it in a project folder, label it appropriately, and put it in a sequential list with other recordings that I do for this video. The introduction to this video that you're watching right now is currently sitting in this file here that was done at 8:22 a.m. this morning. You'll notice that I have a whole lot of files beforehand which were attempts or takes to do this introduction. Then to do this next section that I'm doing right now, we have a bunch of additional files that have taken me a fair bit of time just to get to the one that you're listening to right now. As you can see, to get a good quality video out, it's quite an involved process. And what I would normally do is take the files that are here, I'd just delete them, and I would take the files that are here, I would delete them as well. From this point, I might come back to here and rename this to O1 Introduction. This one might be O2 Overview. I think that might be a good thing. Now, the problem with this technique that you're seeing is that it's prone to error. What happens if I delete the wrong file? It's also quite time consuming. So today we want to write some software that's going to solve this problem, but we're going to use custom instructions in ChatGPT to help us write the code. I want to point out that I'm recording this video using Ecamm Live. It's a piece of software for the Mac that I absolutely love. There'll be a link in the description. I'm also changing scenes and stopping the recording using products from Elgato called the Stream Deck. When I change scenes, I'm using a Stream Deck XL. When I start and stop recordings, or in this particular chapter that you're looking at right now, I did a pause in the middle, I'm using a Stream Deck pedal. I use the left-hand button here to start and stop the recording. I use the right-hand button to pause and resume the recording. When I stop the recording, Ecamm saves it into a folder called Ecamm Live Recordings. You can see the file just here. Then I use this product called Hazel. It runs on the Mac, and I've configured a folder called Ecamm Live Recordings basically to my Appycast folder. If we look at this, we've got looking for movie files, and we're moving them into this folder. I'll just click on Other, and you can see that it's going into the recordings directory of A7 categorize mp4.-ci. Now, this works great when you're just working on one project, but it's still a little bit tedious, and it doesn't give me the ability to rename the recordings as they go. This is what this video is about, is solving this particular problem. If I want one of the recordings to go into the Appycast directory, I would turn this on, head over to the folders directory. We should see that file disappear in a moment. There it is. I'll just go into my Appycast folder. We'll head over here. We'll go to recordings. There's a last file sitting here. At this point, I would then go and manually change these files. Now, I tend to do this as I'm going through the video because it's very difficult looking at a timestamp to know what video means what, and to get rid of stuff that's irrelevant. Again, getting rid of files will also be part of what this script is about. What I'll do now is manually play around with these 4 file names, and this is the sort of commands that we're going to get the script to do. And the first one is that I've got a duplicate file here. I'm just going to delete that. I've got a file here which is really related to the overview. So what I'll do is I'll come into this overview, just call it A. This is O2. So we're in the overview section. I number them so that they do show up sequentially. If I used just the word overview, I never know where it's going to be. Then I've got the letter A, so it's the first overview section. And we'll go to this second one. We'll also call it O2 overview, but we'll just put the letter B inside it. For simplicity, I'm just going to repeat that for all of these. We have C, which I've spelt wrong. We have D. See what happens when you don't use numbers and you just rely on alphabetical ordering. Things get out of whack. So we can just take that little C, we'll move it to here. Then we've got a bunch of files that are all going to be in a sequential order. Now, finally, I could actually write some software to join all of these videos sequentially into one final video, but that I'm going to leave for another video. Now let's start designing our custom instruction. I've decided to call it a video organizer. What it will be is a Ruby script to organize video recording. Let's head over to our custom instruction builder. Currently we have a role called Ruby script organize recordings. What we'll do is we'll just add in a section called overview. From there we should be able to add in work with one video project at a time. We'll also provide actions for rename, delete, archiving of files. That's basically what we need to do. We want to watch a source folder for new files, then we need to move them to the target folder. What I want it to do is help me to write scripts in Ruby that will categorize video recordings out of Ecamm Live. Now I've also stated or OBS because ChatGPT may not know about Ecamm Live, but Ecamm Live is essentially a Mac version of OBS. We have our preliminary script written, so what I think we should do is head over to ChatGPT and we can start testing it out. Now I probably won't do it as a custom instruction just yet because there's still a lot more to work on this. We'll just use a regular prompt technique. Head over to our ChatGPT 4, we'll just use default at the moment. I'll just paste that information in. We have the Ruby script to organize video recordings, a list of instructions. I might just press enter on that. We'll just see what this is going to say. So ChatGPT has come up with a pretty extensive little script here. What we'll do is we'll work through what it currently thinks I need. That'll help me to develop the custom instructions so I can write this correctly. Now it's decided that I'm going to need some sort of file watcher library. They're called gems in Ruby. It's given 3 constants for folders. So we have a source folder, a target folder. So we're moving videos from the Ecamm Live directory over to some sort of project or video project directory. It's also got an archive folder. I also explained that for me, it's not so much an archive, but a temporary backup so that if I accidentally delete a file and want to bring it back, I can at least find it. After that, it's just introduced a bunch of methods into a script. We have one that will move a file from one folder to another. We can rename a file from one file name. This looks like it's an absolute file path. Not the way I want to work with it, but this would be the basic command going on. Then we have the ability to delete files. We have the ability to archive files. One of the other things going on is there's some pretty basic logging, the sort of logging you would do in a regular sort of script. And then finally, we're watching the source file and invoking the move file. That's one of the bits of code it's put in there. As we look through it, this is how you would run it. You would type Ruby video organizer. So let's have a think about what it's currently done and start expanding on the custom instructions so it's more in keeping with the idea of the software I want to write. So ChatGPT has written a bunch of code for me, but essentially it's guessed at what the goal of the application is because I haven't really given it a goal. So I think as we develop a custom GPT instruction, we're going to need a command to state what the goal of the application is. Now, a goal is not something that you set at the beginning and then forget about it. This can be a little bit of a moving target. So it does make sense that there is a command that we can interact with ChatGPT called goal. The idea that you might state it at the beginning of your bot session, but that you might change it over time. So let's go and develop 2 little commands. One is called help, so that we know how to use our bot, and one is called goal. I'm going to introduce the concept of commands into our custom instruction. And the idea of commands is to have this little instruction that you can reuse that does something repeatable and consistently every time. The first 2 commands that I generally like to do is the help and the status command. Now, if you're subscribed to the channel, you'll see that these 2 commands were first introduced in the to-do list manager. I think that's a video that you might want to follow if you just want to understand the basic concept of commanding and controlling ChatGPT through custom instructions. But to keep things quick here, you can see that the help command will show the role. The role is just here. It'll give a list of commands. At the moment we have two, one called help, one called status. It'll give an overview of how it works. That will take into account concepts like the overview, later on the guidelines. The status command is really just a shortened version of the help command. It's something that I like to run after every command. I don't need a detailed review of how this system works. When I need that, I can use help. But from command to command, I do want a memory jogger of what's available, maybe concepts like the current state of the bot. The first useful command that we're going to introduce to the custom instruction is going to be called goal. The idea of this goal is that we should be able to tell our bot what we want to achieve, what it's meant to be helping us to do. The good thing about having a command called goal is that you can fill it in. If over time you think your goals are changing, there's a bit of a moving target, you should be able to reiterate with a new goal. We've set up a command for our custom instruction, but what I'd like to do now is deal with how ChatGPT responds. I basically want to format information and have a little bit of control over that. What I'm doing is adding a section called response. When I hit save in that, we should see a new visualization showing the response section. From there, I'll add in a response that handles specifically the status. What I want to do with a status is I want to display the commands, but I just want to show them on one line and I want them to be in bold. The other thing that would be useful is that when we're showing a help, we don't want it to hallucinate and come up with its own commands. So let's just tell it to list the commands that we've provided. And with the status command, I also want to make sure that happens after every command we do except for help. You see the status is a summary of help, so you don't need it as part of help, but it might be useful to have the status command show up after we do a goal or any other commands that we add into the system. Let's now test our custom instruction. Keep in mind that we now have two sets of information. One is the request. The request is made up of information from the role, the overview, and the commands. We also have another section called the response, and that's taken from this section here. To start using this custom instruction, we can just paste in the request information. Then we can come down to the response button, and that information can be pasted into the how would you like ChatGPT to respond. Hit save, and I will start a new chat just to make sure we've got the right information. We'll just type in help and see what ChatGPT is going to come up with. We've got a list of our commands. We've got the help command, the goal command, and the status command. It's come up with an overview of what it does based on the overview that we provided, the role name, the commands. This should change a little bit the moment we give it a goal, but for now this is a great starting point. I think at this point it might be useful to test out this little goal command that we've got. I'll just type the word goal followed by a colon. Then I've pre-set up a couple of lines. We'll see what they all say. So the first one is that you will help me create a Ruby programming using single responsibility principle and don't repeat yourself programming techniques. The idea of this is that I want it to write good, clean code across multiple files. I don't want just one big, long script because that'll be very hard to debug and alter as needed. The next part of the goal is that there will be one entry script. So there will be a script. I'm not going to create a library or anything like that. It will just be a script. It should support command line arguments. Then I want to make sure that any action within the code, maybe it's something like moving or archiving a file, I would like that to be in its own class, its own program. I also want to make sure that we also have programs or classes to handle settings and configuration. One of the things I think this might try to do is start writing that code. So I have made the statement, please wait for guidance before proceeding. Another part of the goal that's going to be really important is just the structure of the files coming from Ecamm Live, how I want them to be sorted, categorized in the system. So why don't we have a look at the current file system for all the recordings that have gone into this particular video. You can see a bunch of files that have been created. I started this video at about 7 a.m. this morning, but didn't really get going until 8:22. That's the point at which I created an introduction. The good thing is that if I use a tool like FFmpeg to combine files together, I can really just take all the files in alphabetical order, put them all into one big video. The reason for that is that I've been numbering them as I go. So the first video is 01. Currently, the last video is the 10 series. You might also notice that within each number sequence, there's a subsequence. So something like the overview sequence, which is number 2, it's labeled. So I have a tag so that I remember, oh, this is the overview, is listed A, B, C, D, E. There's still, everything is in alphabetical order from 01 to 02A, 02B, all the way through to 02E, before then moving on to 03. In this case, it's 03A with another tag. And a tag happens to be custom instruction. Which one? It's the role, or custom instruction overview. I think it's going to be very important as we write the goal for our application that we let it know that we have this running sequence of 01 through to say 99, that there are sections like the overview, the introductions, the custom instructions, that they them in their own right have their own subsequence going on, A, B, C, D, E. We may even be able to provide a little bit of extra information. I'll explain why in a moment. It might seem odd, but there are concepts going in here like we have a transition. It's related to the first commands that I've been running, but further on there's probably some other transitions. So here's a transition for a response. The concept of the word transition, or the word CI for custom instruction, for me it's like a tagging capability. I want to know the videos related to transitions, because when I get to the video editing, I'll actually want to do some sort of swoosh or something like that. By labeling it now, I can then get ChatGPT to read this information later on, do future automations, stuff I haven't thought of yet. Now, do I need that for this project today? Probably not. It's a little bit of overkill, but these are some of the things I'm thinking about in the file naming conventions as we build out this application. One other bit of information that's going to be really important is the file naming convention from Ecamm itself. We can see it starts off with this idea of Ecamm live recording on, then there's a date sequence, a time sequence. This information we're going to have to put it into the goal so that when it's using, say, regular expressions to figure out what sort of file it is, we can already preempt ChatGPT with the structure of the Ecamm files. But for now, I'm just going to go and manually modify these. This one is part of the GPT goal that we're in the middle of developing. It's number C. The one below it is D. As soon as I start recording this part of the video that you're listening to right now, we'll put in E. Let's come back to this goal that we've been developing. What I'll do is I'll move over to Visual Studio. From here, we got a little bit more space to type. We'll add in the concept that the source files will be in the format of Ecamm Live followed by year, month, date, hour, minute, seconds format. Also say that for the target files, there's a few concepts here. They will need to be stored in a sequence order from 01 through to 99. That target files will be subgrouped within the sequence, so there might be a 01A, B, and C. Finally, I will add a label of some sort. There'll be a suffix added to the sequence, subsequence. That information might just be informational, or it might be a category. We can specify that information by saying sometimes there will be text categories such as CI for custom instruction or transition to indicate that the video file will need a transition effect in editing. Hopefully it's going to understand this information. We also need to note that any commands that might damage files, in particular the deletion command, we need to do a backup. I've given a current list of the samples. These are the videos I've been recording this morning. It gives a pattern of these files in a visual format. Here they are. They go from 01 introduction through to ABCDE overview. The section we're in at the moment is the GPT goal that we're writing at the moment. I've also given a list example of what the Ecamm live file could be. I think we can just take this information here. We'll head over to ChatGPT, just copy it in all the way. The fact that it's got the word goal like that with a colon, that's the command. It should match up to this concept here. So let's press enter and we'll see what happens. Your goal is to create a Ruby program following SRP and dry methodologies. We'll build a system to handle video files for organization and manipulation, ensuring different actions are modularized within their own code base, files and classes. It's suggesting that there'll be a main entry script. It's also thought of the file watcher, the file handler, and the backup manager. This might actually be close to what I want, though sometimes I like to really follow single responsibility principle. With that, I would use the command pattern around concepts like archive, delete, and rename. These sorts of things might be their own files rather than, as it's suggesting here, a file handler. Lastly, it's also suggesting where to start, which makes sense. So the CLI is where we're going to start. I think we can get going and start building this application. I've decided to call this application Fly Video. The reason for that is that one of my YouTube channels is about automation for YouTube influence. It's called @Fly Video. I think that might be a good name for this application. To start off with, I go, can you create a starting file called flyvideo.rb? Can you add basic CLI starting code? I'm also going to give a little bit of extra information here. My app is called Fly Video. I'll have a global and a project level configuration. Then what I've done is I've named where the file will be. There'll be a flyvideo.json file. That'll be the global. Currently, I believe I need a location for the Ecamm live recordings, which will be my home directory. I also need the main project root folder. For me, that's sitting on sync.com. It's also sitting on an external drive. I've got that configured here. I believe that under that particular folder, I'll then have my individual project folders. Each of them will need a file called flyvideo.json. We could use the same name again, or maybe it'd be better if it was just fv.json. The main thing here is that when a file is being moved from Ecamm Live to the target folder, where do I want it to go? For individual recordings, I just want them to go into the recordings directory, but you would have noticed that there were subgroups. I would call them a chapter. So I'm also going to have a configuration for the chapter. What we can do is we'll just copy this information, head over to ChatGPT, and we'll paste that in as well. We've just got this extra little bit of context to help start off the application. We'll press enter and let's see what ChatGPT starts creating for us. Let's go through that in detail. So the first pass of this is on track. We have what is essentially a single script file. We will need to break this out into individual files. It's decided that there'll be a global configuration file living on the expanded path, so that tilde on my case would become my home directory. It's also listed two different file names that can be used for the project settings, and then it's gone on and created a config class. This is one of those classes that will need to live in its own file. When I look through this, The constructor is just loading the global and the project configuration. It throws an exception in both cases if one or the other does not exist, and it will detect a file name based on the rules that we listed up here, which is flyvideo.json or fv.json. It's then gone and put in a basic CLI setup. We've got help, and that's about it. It instantiates the fly video class and it calls the run command. So nothing happening so far other than a little bit of logging. This too will need to be in its own file. We will need to think about what this class is going to be called, because currently it is in the flyvideo.rb, which is the starting script. So either the starting script name needs to change or this class name needs to change. I'd like to test out this code. We'll click on the copy code button. We'll head over to Visual Studio. We'll just paste the information in there, hit save. I think it might be time to just rename this file, because that will be the name of the class. This is only the script, and fly should be good enough. From there, we should be able to head over to a terminal window. Let's have a look at what we got there. We got our fly.rb. I've already set up an alias to call ruby fly.rb, followed by a list of parameters. Type in fly just to see what happens. We get an error. It says here that the global configuration file does not exist. Now that information is coming from this exception being raised just here. I've gone and created a file called flyvideo.json with a full stop in front of it. I've put in where my Ecamm live recordings are, the project root. So projects will live as subfolders underneath this particular path. It's going into my sync.com drive. This way I can synchronize it with a video editor if I want to. I have a bunch of YouTube channels. This is the AppyCast channel. Currently in the active cast is where I want recordings to be saved to. We'll run it one more time. Now it says that the project configuration file does not exist. So we do currently have our global configuration, but not our project. That leads to a little bit of a problem. The problem with the way ChatGPT has written this code is it's looked at something like the load project configuration, said if it does not exist, raise an exception. Now, I think the way I want to use this software is that when I call the command line for a sub-project, if it doesn't exist, then it probably should just use some sort of default values. May also want to have an additional command running from the command line where I can create a subfolder, which would make sense the first time I'm trying to create a video for a new project. Looking at the terminal here, if I was to type fly followed by a project, it might be useful to figure out what a project name might be. We'll head over to this folder. This is currently where I'm storing videos. You can see previous projects that I've created very manually in the process. The one we're working with today is called A27 AppyCast categorize mp4s.ci. So the command I'm thinking we would want would be fly followed by that name. What it should do is we already know from the global configuration where the folder is that we are right now. If I just type in a pwd, we're currently in the cast active directory. So calling that same statement over here as fly followed by a project code should probably do one of two things. If the folder underneath the root exists, then load in a configuration. If it doesn't exist, maybe ask a question, would you like to create a new project? At the same time as creating a new project, maybe create the configuration for the project. Two areas of code are going to need to change. The way the load project config happens, and we're also going to need a new project setting. What I think we can do is if we just bring up ChatGPT, I've started writing a question. I would like a new CLI option called -p or -project with the project name. I've given an example of how it will be called. Then from there, I basically want it to go, if there is no project, ask a question, would you like to create a project? If yes, it should create the project folder. It should create a fv.json file. It should give it some basic starting values. The only other thing it could do is that if it already exists, then just open it. So ChatGPT has written a bunch of code for us, and we're going to find out soon the limitations of using ChatGPT to write all your code for you versus, say, using a custom instruction to give a fair bit more structure and consistency to the code that gets produced. But let's look at the issue we're about to run into. We've got this new code that it's said to add and include into our application. There's an idea of handling the project option, which will be the -p or the -project. Basically, if the project exists, then we're going to have to include some code to load the project configuration. If it doesn't exist, then it asks us a question: would you like to create a new project? Which is exactly what we need it to do. It says, if yes, create a project folder and create the project configuration. There are two simple methods going on: one to make a directory if the directory does not exist, and one to create a configuration file in the format of fv.json with some default values. That concludes part one of software that I'm writing to automate my video YouTube channels. What we've been doing is developing a custom GPT instruction for writing code. Now, if you're interested in GPT instructions in general, maybe check out one of the videos over here on the right. If you're interested in part two, where I continue the creation of this software, that'll also be listed on the right.